You have no idea what a woman is capable of when she discovers she's been betrayed in the most cowardly way possible. Hello, my dears. I'm Esther, 83 years young, and today I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me almost 60 years ago, but still gives me immense satisfaction to remember. Before I begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love knowing where my listeners are from. Now let's get to the story that will leave you speechless. It was 1965. I was only 23 years old. I had been married for 6 years to a man named Arthur. Back then, I was a young mother of 3 small children: Adam, 5 years old, Claire, 3, and Benjamin, who was just 1. To everyone looking in, we seemed like the perfect family. We had our own house on Maple Street, a blue Chevrolet Impala that was the envy of the neighborhood, and my husband owned a fabric store that was doing very well. Arthur was a respected businessman in town. He had a young secretary, Marlene, a woman in her early 20s, well-dressed, who had been working for him for about 2 years. I never suspected anything. The woman was polite to me, always greeted me when we ran into each other in town. And I, foolish as I was, even thought she was a respectable girl. In those days, husbands went to work and wives took care of the home and children. That's how it worked, and I didn't question it. I trusted my husband blindly. What a terrible mistake that was, my goodness. It was on a Thursday afternoon, January 13th, 1965, a date forever etched in my memory, that my life completely changed. Arthur had come home for lunch, as he always did. After lunch, he went to shower before returning to the store. I was arranging his clothes when I decided to check the pockets before putting his suit in the closet. It was my habit to always do this so nothing would be left in the pockets that might get ruined in the wash. That's when I felt a paper in the inside pocket of his jacket. I pulled it out and saw it was a letter, but not just any letter, my dears. It was a perfumed letter written in delicate feminine handwriting. My heart immediately started racing. Something told me it wasn't good news, but I needed to know what was written there. I opened the letter with trembling hands, and what I read made the floor disappear beneath my feet. It was from Marlene, my husband's secretary, and it wasn't a work letter, no, it was a love letter. She wrote things like, "My love, I can hardly wait for our trip. It will be our honeymoon. 3 months, just for us in Miami." Folks, I read that letter about 10 times trying to understand if I was dreaming or if it was real. The letter talked about a trip they were going to take together, a 3-month trip to Miami. And the worst part, Arthur had told me he was traveling alone to expand the business and make new commercial contacts. What a liar. What a scoundrel. At that moment, sitting on our bedroom bed with that letter in my hands, I felt a mixture of pain, anger, and humiliation that I had never experienced before. I cried a lot, really a lot. The children were playing in the living room and couldn't see me in that state. I had to control myself not to make a scene. But after the initial shock passed, something strange happened to me. Instead of continuing to cry and lament, a coldness took over me. A calculating coldness. I began to think with a clarity I didn't know I had. If my husband thought he could deceive me in such a vile way, he was going to find out who he was messing with. I put the letter back exactly as it was and returned it to his jacket pocket. He couldn't suspect anything. When Arthur came back from his shower, I was in the kitchen preparing his coffee as if nothing had happened. He grabbed his jacket, gave me a little kiss on my forehead and said, "See you later, honey," as he did every day. How I managed to pretend everything was normal at that moment, I don't know to this day. But I did. I smiled at him, wished him a good day at work, and watched him leave through the window. Only when his car disappeared from view did I allow the tears to flow again. That same evening, Arthur came home and officially announced the trip. He said a business opportunity had come up in Miami, that he would be there for 3 months, that it was important for the family's future. He lied right to my face, folks. He lied to me and his children as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I pretended to be concerned about the trip. I asked if he would be alone for so long, if he wouldn't miss us. And this scoundrel even had the nerve to console me, saying he would call often, send letters, and bring presents for all of us when he returned. What an actor he was, my goodness. If there were an Oscar for lying husbands, he would win in the main category. During the days that followed, Arthur organized everything for the trip. He said he would travel at the beginning of February and return only in May, 3 whole months to enjoy a honeymoon with his mistress while I stayed home taking care of our 3 children alone. But I had other plans he never dreamed I would be capable of making. I began to observe everything with different eyes. I noticed how excited he got when talking about the trip, how he smiled when the phone rang and it was someone from work, who I now knew was Marlene. I noticed how he started taking better care of himself, buying new clothes, a different cologne, all to impress his mistress. Meanwhile, I began to plan my revenge, because it would be revenge, you can be sure of that. He was going to pay, and pay dearly, for humiliating me this way. First, I needed to understand exactly what our family's financial situation was. I went through his papers, something I had never done before. I discovered we had a good amount in the bank, that the house was paid off, that the store was profitable. We had assets, and I had access to everything because back then wives had power of attorney from their husbands to take care of business when they traveled. That's when the brilliant idea came to my mind. If he was going to abandon me for 3 months to live a romance with another woman, then when he returned, he would find a little surprise he would never forget. I was going to sell everything, the house, the car, the furniture, empty the bank accounts, cancel all the store's suppliers, and ruin his life while he was having fun with that tramp. And the most brilliant part of all, I was going to do it all legally, using the power of attorney he himself had given me. He wouldn't be able to do anything about it because, technically, I had the right to manage the family's assets. In the last days before the trip, I could barely contain my anxiety. It wasn't anxiety from sadness about the separation, as he thought. It was anxiety to begin executing my revenge plan. On the eve of the trip, Arthur made an emotional speech about how he would miss us, how this trip was important for our future, how I was such an understanding wife. I listened quietly, nodding my head, but inside I was thinking, enjoy these 3 months well, my dear, because when you return, your life will be completely destroyed. On the day of departure, February 1st, 1965, I still played the role of the dedicated wife. I packed his suitcase with all the care. I made a special breakfast, even cried a little at the time of farewell to make the scene more realistic. He hugged me, kissed the children, promised to write often, and left in his blue Impala toward the train station. I stood at the door, waving until the car disappeared from view, with our 3 children by my side. As soon as he disappeared, I took a deep breath and thought, now the real fun begins. The next 3 months would be the most intense of my life. And when Arthur returned from his honeymoon with Marlene, he would discover that he had messed with the wrong woman. My dears, now I'll tell you how I executed the most calculated and silent revenge a woman has ever carried out. During those 3 long months, while my husband was having the time of his life in Miami with that tramp, I was here transforming his life into a living hell. And he didn't even dream what was happening. On the first day after his departure, I woke up with a determination I didn't know I had. I got up early, dressed the children, gave them breakfast, and when I put the little ones to play in the backyard, I sat at the kitchen table to make a list. It wasn't just any list. It was my revenge list. I wrote down everything I needed to do: sell the house, sell the car, sell the furniture, close the bank accounts, cancel the store's suppliers, sell all the inventory. But I had to do it all slowly, carefully, so that when he returned, there wouldn't be a single penny left for that good-for-nothing. The first week was the hardest, because I was still getting used to the idea that I was really going to do this. Every time the phone rang, I answered with the sweetest voice in the world. It was Arthur calling to ask how the children were, if everything was okay at home. What a hypocrite, calling from the hotel bed where he was with his mistress to ask about the family he had abandoned. I would respond that everything was great, that the children missed their daddy, that the house was in order, lie after lie, just like he was doing to me. The difference was that my lies had a purpose, to protect my plan until the right moment. In the second week of February, I really started to get to work. First, I went to the bank. I arrived all dressed up in my best outfit, carrying the power of attorney he had given me. The manager, Mr. Matthews, knew me well, so he didn't ask any strange questions when I said I needed to move funds around. I started slowly. First, I withdrew a smaller amount, saying it was for some home renovations. Then, a few days later, I went back and withdrew a bit more, explaining that an investment opportunity had come up. Mr. Matthews even congratulated me on my initiative to take care of family business while my husband was traveling. If he knew I was planning to completely break that husband of mine, I think he would have fainted right there in the bank. At the same time, I began to survey the real estate market. I approached Mr. E. Johnson, who was a real estate agent in town, and said I was thinking of selling the house. I made up a story that Arthur wanted to move to a larger house when he returned from his trip, and that I wanted to get a head start on selling our current one. Our house was one of the best on the street, well maintained, with a large yard, 3 bedrooms. Mr. Johnson was very interested and said he would have no difficulty selling it. We arranged for him to bring some potential buyers to visit in the following weeks. Meanwhile, at the store, I began my favorite part of the plan. Since I had access to everything, I went there several times in the first week, always with the excuse of picking up some papers or checking if everything was in order. Marlene, of course, wasn't there anymore because she had traveled with my husband. How convenient, right? I began canceling orders with suppliers. I called each one of them, explaining that because of Arthur's trip, we were going to pause merchandise purchases. Some were surprised because the store had always been a good customer, but I gave convincing excuses about reorganizing inventory and changes in the business. The next step was to sell the inventory that was already in the store. Here I had to be more creative. I started having incredible sales, selling fabrics at very low prices. I told customers it was a special liquidation because of my husband's trip. In 2 weeks, I managed to sell almost half the inventory. The money from the sales I religiously saved in an account I opened solely in my name at a bank in another town. Every week I would take a little trip there to deposit what I had managed to sell. The funniest thing is that people in town started praising me for my initiative. They said I was being a very dedicated wife, taking care of everything alone while my husband worked for the family's future. If they knew what I was really doing was preparing his ruin, they would have been scandalized. At the beginning of March, the first serious buyer for the house appeared. It was a young couple, the Smiths, who had just gotten married and were looking for a house to start their life. They fell in love with the house on their first visit. They offered a fair price, cash, and wanted to close the deal quickly. I said I needed to talk to my husband, who was traveling, but that in principle I was interested in selling. I scheduled a second visit for the following week and began preparing all the documentation. That night, Arthur called as he always did. He was euphoric, saying business in Miami was going very well, that he had made important contacts, that the trip was being a success. Liar, shameless man. I knew he was just having fun with that hussy, spending our money on fancy hotels and expensive restaurants. But I played my part in the performance. I said I was proud of him, that the children were fine, that I was taking care of everything with great care. I even made up that I had made some improvements to the store, better organizing the merchandise. He was delighted, saying I was the best wife in the world. How ironic, isn't it? He thought I was being the perfect wife while I was destroying his entire life, brick by brick. During the Smiths' second visit, we closed the deal. They paid cash, as promised, and I got an excellent price for the house. The money went straight to my secret account. We agreed that they would only take possession of the house at the end of April, a few days before Arthur would return. Perfect for my plans. With the money from the house secured, I moved on to selling the furniture. Here, I had to be even smarter because I couldn't sell everything at once, or the neighbors would get suspicious. I started by selling the most valuable pieces first: the dining room sideboard, the china cabinet, the good sewing machine. I invented various excuses for the neighbors. I told one that I was selling the china cabinet because I wanted to buy a more modern one when my husband returned. To another, I explained that the sewing machine was malfunctioning, and I preferred to sell it now to buy a new one. I always had a convincing explanation for each sale. People in town started commenting that I was full of plans and changes for when Arthur returned. They said I was a woman of vision, always thinking about improving the house and the family's life. How blind these people were! I was preparing to disappear from that traitor's life. In mid-March, it was time for the car, the blue Impala that was Arthur's pride and joy. This was harder to sell without raising suspicions because everyone in town knew our car. I had to find a buyer from outside of town. I managed through an acquaintance who worked at a dealership in the neighboring town. I explained that my husband had decided to change cars when he returned from his trip and wanted to sell the current one to facilitate the deal. The buyer came on a Thursday afternoon, examined the car, found it to be in excellent condition, and closed the deal on the spot. Another considerable sum for my secret account. I was getting rich at the expense of the misery I was preparing for that unfaithful man. To disguise the absence of the car, I made up that there was a problem with the engine, and it was in the shop for a major repair. The neighbors offered rides when I needed to go out with the children, and I accepted with pleasure, always lamenting the bad luck of having car problems right when my husband was traveling. By the end of March, the store was practically empty. I had sold almost all the inventory, canceled all suppliers, and was collecting all outstanding accounts from customers. The money continued to go to my personal account. During this time, Arthur called, very worried because some suppliers had tried to contact him in Miami. I explained that I had canceled some orders to reorganize the inventory, that I thought it would be better for him to start from scratch when he returned, with new and more modern merchandise. He liked the idea. He said I was thinking like a true businesswoman, that he was proud of my initiative. He even suggested that when he returned we could expand the store, invest more in the business. Poor man, he didn't know that when he returned, there wouldn't even be a store left to expand. In April, I intensified the operation. I sold the last pieces of furniture, the last valuable items in the house. I completely cleaned out the bank accounts, leaving only some small change so as not to raise suspicions. I even canceled the electricity and water contracts for the house for the end of the month. In parallel, I was organizing my move to Madison, Wisconsin, where my sister Candace lived. She knew everything I was doing and had offered me total support. She had even found a small house to rent there, small but sufficient for me and the 3 children. At the end of April, with just 1 week left before Arthur's return, I was practically ready. The house was sold, the car sold, the furniture sold, the accounts emptied, the store vacant. I had a nice sum saved in my secret account, enough to restart life in a new city. But I still had one last act of my revenge to execute, the most delicious of all, a party he would never forget in his life. Because, do you think I was going to leave secretly like a fugitive? No way. I was going to make sure I was there when he returned. I was going to look that scoundrel in the face when he discovered his life was over. And the party I was planning would be the perfect grand finale to my revenge. My dears, now comes the most delicious part of this whole story. The party I organized to welcome my husband back was the most brilliant thing I've ever done in my life. You'll be open-mouthed when you hear how I executed the final blow to that traitor's life. There were only 5 days left until Arthur's return when I began to prepare my masterpiece. For 3 months, I had silently destroyed the entire structure of his life. But now I wanted the whole town to witness the moment when he would discover his complete ruin. The idea for the party came to me one Sunday morning when I was in church with the children. During the service, I observed all those people from our community, people who knew our family, who respected my husband, who thought we were the example of a happy and prosperous family. That's when I thought, What a wonderful thing it would be if all these people knew the truth about who Arthur really was. I left church with my mind buzzing with ideas. I spent the entire Sunday planning every detail of the party. It would be a welcome home party, a loving reception for the husband returning from a long business trip. At least, that's what everyone would think. On Monday morning, I began spreading the invitations around town. I went from house to house, from store to store, inviting everyone. I said I wanted to make a special surprise for Arthur, that he deserved a grand reception after 3 months working hard for our family's future. People were charmed by my dedication as a wife. Mrs. Morgan, our neighbor, even commented that I was an example of a woman always thinking about her husband's well-being. Mr. Anderson from the bakery said it was rare to see such a caring wife these days. If they knew I was inviting the whole town to witness the public destruction of my husband, they would have had a fit. I made sure to invite everyone from his work, too. After all, they knew Marlene. They knew she had traveled at the same time as my husband. It would be interesting to see their reactions when they discovered the two had traveled together. During the week, I finalized the last preparations for my revenge. I kept the love letters I had found in Arthur's pocket safely tucked away. These letters would be my main evidence at the time of the public humiliation. I also organized all the receipts for the sales I had made. Not that I was going to show them to everyone, but I wanted to have everything documented for when he tried to question what I had done. Legally, I was protected by the power of attorney he himself had given me. On Thursday, the day before his return, I went to the house I had rented in Madison for a final check. Everything was ready for our move. The little house was simple but cozy, perfect for starting a new life with my children, far from that liar. That night, Arthur called, excited from Miami. He said he was eager to return, that he had many news to tell, that the trip had been a complete success. He asked if I had any surprise prepared for him because he was feeling that something special awaited him at home. How right he was. I really had prepared an unforgettable surprise for him. I replied in the sweetest voice in the world that yes, I had a little surprise waiting, that he would be very moved by what he would find upon arriving. It wasn't a lie. He really was going to be moved, just not in the way he expected. On Friday morning, the day of his return, I woke up with an energy I didn't know I had. It was the day of my perfect revenge. I dressed the children in their best clothes, put on my prettiest dress, and began preparing the house for the party. I ordered some appetizers from Mr. Anderson's bakery, bought sodas, decorated the living room with some flowers. Nothing too elaborate, just enough to give a festive air to the environment. The important thing wasn't the decoration, it was what was going to happen during the party. The first people began to arrive around 5 in the afternoon. I had said Arthur would arrive at 6, so I wanted everyone gathered when he appeared. The house filled with people, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, people from his work, including some who worked with Marlene. Everyone was excited, commenting on how I was such a dedicated wife, how lucky Arthur was to have a woman who organized such a loving party to welcome him back. I smiled and thanked them for the compliments, but inside I was counting the minutes until the moment of truth. Promptly at 6 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. My heart raced, but not from nervousness. It was from pure anticipation of what was to come. I looked through the window and saw my husband getting out of a taxi, carrying his suitcases, with that satisfied smile of someone returning from a wonderful trip. A few minutes later, I heard another car. It was Marlene, arriving as if she were just a colleague coming to greet the boss who was returning from a trip. What nerve that tramp had. She entered the house greeting everyone politely, pretending she barely knew my husband. When Arthur entered the house and saw all those people gathered, he was truly moved. He came to hug me, saying I was the best wife in the world, that he hadn't expected such a loving reception. He kissed me on the forehead and whispered in my ear that he had missed me very much. What an actor he was. He had just returned from a 3-month honeymoon with his mistress and still had the courage to play the role of the longing husband. During the first half hour of the party, I let everyone talk, greet each other, catch up. Arthur was radiant, telling one person after another about the trip, about the business he had done, about how Miami was a wonderful city. Marlene stayed in a corner, talking quietly with some people, always avoiding getting too close to my husband to not raise suspicions. But I noticed the looks they exchanged, that complicity of people who had shared intimate moments. When I realized that all attention was focused on Arthur and his stories from the trip, I decided it was time to take center stage. I went to where the radio was, turned off the music, and clapped my hands to get everyone's attention. The house fell into complete silence. All faces turned to me, expecting me to make some toast or welcome speech to my dear husband. I began speaking in a firm and clear voice. Everyone, thank you very much for your presence here today. It's very moving to see so many friends gathered for this special occasion. Arthur smiled proudly, thinking I was going to make a speech praising him and his dedication to work during those 3 months. I continued. Actually, this party isn't exactly a welcome party. It's a farewell party. My farewell party. A low murmur began in the room. People were confused, not understanding what I was trying to say. Arthur's smile began to fade. That's when I dropped the bomb. During these 3 months, while my husband was in Miami, he wasn't alone as everyone thinks. He was accompanied by his secretary Marlene, who is here with us today. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Everyone looked at Marlene, who turned white as a sheet. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. I took the love letters I had saved from my pocket and began reading excerpts for everyone to hear. My love, I can hardly wait for our trip. It will be 3 months just for us, our honeymoon in Miami. The reaction was immediate. Some guests were mouth agape, others began to whisper among themselves. Marlene tried to head for the door, but I continued reading. You are the man of my life, Arthur. I can hardly wait for us to start our life together, away from everything and everyone. It was at this moment that Arthur exploded. Red with anger, he interrupted me, shouting, Enough! So what if you found out? Do you think I care? You were never a real woman anyway. I'm going to move in with my Marlene and give her the best life of all. You figure it out with these children. The room was in total shock at his rudeness. Some ladies even brought their hands to their chests, scandalized by those words. But I was expecting exactly that reaction. With the calmest smile in the world, I responded, How good that you said that, Arthur, because now I can tell everyone the rest of the story. And then came the coup de grace. During these 3 months while you two were having fun in Miami, I sold our house, sold your car, sold all our furniture, emptied all our bank accounts, canceled all your store's suppliers, and sold all the inventory that was there. His face changed color as I spoke. From the red of anger, it turned to the white of despair. I continued. So, my dear, good luck giving the best life to your Marlene. Good luck finding somewhere to live because the house isn't ours anymore. Good luck buying a car because yours has been sold. And good luck restarting the store because there isn't even a spool of thread left in there. What happened next was even better than I had imagined. Marlene, who until then had been paralyzed with shock, exploded. Arthur, is this true? You have nothing? You deceived me. And before he could answer, she crossed the room and gave him a slap across the face that echoed throughout the entire house. You're a failure. I thought we were going to have a good life together. I never want to see your face again. And she ran out of the party, leaving my husband alone, humiliated, ruined, in front of the entire town. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody knew what to do or say. Arthur stood there frozen, with the mark of the slap on his face, realizing he had lost everything, his family, his mistress, his possessions, his reputation. That's when I took my 3 children by the hand and headed for the door. Before leaving, I turned to the guests and said, Thank you very much for your presence. Now I'm going to start my new life with my children. And I left my own party, leaving all those people behind, most of them impressed with my courage. That was the last time I set foot in that house, and the last time I looked at the face of that man I had called husband. I left that party with my 3 children and went straight to my friend Zoe's house, where we were going to spend our last night in town. She had been taking care of our luggage during the party because I already had everything organized for our departure the next day. That night I couldn't sleep a minute. It wasn't regret, no. It was a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and anxiety for what was to come. For 3 months I had planned every detail of my revenge, and now that everything had gone right, I needed to face the reality of my new life. The children slept peacefully, poor things. Adam, who was already 5 years old, asked where Daddy was and why we weren't sleeping at home. I explained that we were taking a special trip, that we were going to visit a new city where Aunt Candace lived. He got excited about the idea of the adventure. On Saturday morning, we took the first bus to Madison. During the whole trip, I kept imagining what must be happening in the town we left behind. How Arthur had spent the night, where he had slept, what he was doing to find out his family's whereabouts. We arrived in Madison in the late afternoon. My sister Candace was waiting for us at the bus station with her husband Owen. When they saw me get off the bus with the 3 children and just a few suitcases, they were moved. Candace hugged me and whispered in my ear, "You were very brave, sister. Now everything will be all right." The little house I had rented was simple but cozy. 2 small bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Very different from the big house we had before, but to me, it represented freedom. It was the beginning of my new life, away from that liar. In those first days in Madison, I dedicated myself to organizing our new routine. I enrolled Adam in a school near the house. I found a neighbor to take care of Claire and Benjamin during the day, and I started looking for work. It wasn't easy, my dears. Even with the money I had gotten from the sales, I knew I needed to work to support my children. I couldn't just depend on the savings because they would eventually run out. I got a job at a clothing factory as a seamstress. The salary was small, but at least it was a start. I left home at 6 in the morning and returned at 6 in the evening, tired, but with a clear conscience that I was honestly fighting for my family. Meanwhile, through the letters I received from my friend Zoe, I found out what was happening in our old town. And my goodness, what a disaster Arthur's life had become. In her first letter, Zoe told me that he had spent that first night sleeping on his brother Gerald's couch. On Saturday morning, he had gone to our old house and found the sold sign in front. He stood banging on the door of the new owners, the Smiths, making a scene, shouting that it was his house. Poor Mr. Smith had to call the police to remove Arthur from there. He couldn't believe I had managed to sell the house legally. He thought it was some kind of scam, that the documents were fake. It was only when he went to the county clerk's office and saw all the papers in order that he understood I had really sold everything. The power of attorney that he himself had given me allowed me to make all those transactions. Zoe's second letter came 2 weeks later and brought more details of his misfortune. She told me he had gone to the bank and discovered that all the accounts were empty. The manager, Mr. A. Matthews, explained that I had withdrawn everything little by little during the 3 months, always with the documentation in order. Arthur tried to question the transactions, but there was no way. I was an authorized account holder, had power of attorney, and all the withdrawals had been made legally. The bank couldn't do anything to help him. The worst of all was when he went to the store. He found the establishment completely empty, with only the empty shelves and some old chairs. The suppliers had canceled all contracts, as I had requested. Not even a button was left for him to restart. Some creditors were already charging the overdue bills from the store. It seems I wasn't the only one who had the idea to leave some debts in his name before disappearing. What an interesting coincidence, isn't it? The third letter brought news about Marlene. Zoe discovered through one of her cousins that the tramp had disappeared from town the same weekend as the party. Nobody knew where she had gone, but the rumor was that she had taken a bus to Ohio right after the humiliation. Months later, through the gossip network, which always works very well in small towns, we learned that she had shown up in Cincinnati. She was working as a sales clerk in a store and living in a modest boarding house. The story that reached us was that she had met a widowed businessman, Mr. Bernard Hamilton, one weekend when she was crying on a park bench in the city. He had felt sorry for her, offered help, and they eventually grew close. Interestingly, Marlene never told anyone about her past with Arthur. She made up a story that she was from a humble family from the countryside and had come to the big city looking for work. Bernard, who was a good and lonely man since his wife had died, fell in love with her story. They got married in December 1965, just 6 months after our memorable party. She became Mrs. Marlene Hamilton, respected wife of a prosperous businessman, a family woman, attending the local church. I have to admit that the clever girl did well for herself. She got what she wanted, a stable and comfortable life with a man who respected her. The difference is that this time she didn't have to destroy a family to get it. Meanwhile, Arthur's situation only got worse. From Zoe's letters, I learned that he had tried to rebuild the store, but without money to buy merchandise and without credibility with suppliers, he couldn't make the business work. His reputation in town was completely destroyed. Everyone knew the story of the betrayal and the revenge I had taken. He became a laughingstock in conversation circles. The men laughed at his situation, and the women praised me for my courage. In addition, he started drinking. At first, it was just a little whiskey now and then to drown his sorrows. Then it became a daily habit. In a few months, he was drinking from morning till night. His brother Gerald put up with him living in his house for a few months, but then he couldn't stand it anymore. Arthur was becoming an inconvenient drunk, always complaining about life, always blaming others for his own mistakes. He never took responsibility for what he had done to his family. In his mind, I was the villain of the story. He played the victim, saying I had exaggerated in my revenge, that an affair didn't justify the complete destruction of his life. What nerve, right? The man cheats on his wife, abandons 3 small children to live a romance with his secretary, and still thinks he was the victim of an injustice. In 1967, 2 years after our separation, he showed up in Madison. He had discovered where I lived through someone and came looking for his family. When I got home from work and found him sitting in my living room talking to the children, I felt a mixture of anger and disgust that almost made me sick. He was different, thinner, with wrinkled clothes, smelling of whiskey even though it was mid-afternoon, red eyes unshaven. He was clearly at rock bottom. The children didn't know how to react. Adam, who was now 7 years old, vaguely remembered his father, but Claire and Benjamin barely recognized him. They had been very young when we left town. He started crying, asking for forgiveness, saying it had been a terrible mistake, that he wanted to win his family back. He promised he would stop drinking, that he would find work, that he would be a better father. I looked him straight in the eyes and said with all the coldness in the world, "Arthur, you can see the children whenever you want. They are your children too, and I won't prevent contact, but we will never be a family again. You made your choice in 1965, and I made mine." I explained that he could visit the children, but that I would never live with him again, that I had rebuilt my life, had an honest job, and wasn't going to throw everything away because of a man who had betrayed and humiliated me. The children's reaction was what hurt me the most. When he tried to approach them, they hid behind me. They cried when he tried to talk to them. Benjamin, who was only 3 years old, didn't even know who this strange man was who claimed to be his daddy. Arthur stayed in town for a week, trying to get close to his children, but the kids were afraid of him, didn't feel comfortable in the presence of this stranger who smelled of alcohol and spoke with a trembling voice. At the end of the week, he gave up and returned to our old town. Before leaving, he sought me out one last time and said he was going to sue for regular visitation rights to the children. I replied that he had every right to try, but that any judge would want to know why a father had abandoned 3 small children to live with a mistress, and why now, 2 years later, he appeared drunk wanting to recover his family. He never filed any lawsuit. He knew he didn't have the moral or financial conditions to fight for custody or visitation. That was the last time we talked face to face. After that, Our communication was limited to messages he sent through third parties, always asking for news of the children, always promising that he would recover and come back for his family. Promises that were never fulfilled, my dears. Arthur's life only went downhill from there. My dears, now I'll tell you how the life of each person in this story ended. Because life has a very interesting way of doing justice, and each one reaped exactly what they sowed. I'll start with my own story, because it was the one that cost me the most to rebuild. After that visit from Arthur in 1967, I continued my life in Madison, working hard at the clothing factory and raising my 3 children alone. It wasn't easy, folks, working all day, coming home tired, and still having to take care of the children, help with homework, cook meals, wash clothes. Many nights I fell into bed exhausted, but always with a clear conscience that I was doing the best for my children. The money I had gotten from the sales gradually ran out. I used it to supplement the low factory salary, to buy school supplies for the children, to pay for medicine when someone got sick. By 1970, 5 years after our arrival, I had spent almost everything. It was around this time that I met Jack. He was a widower, had lost his wife 2 years earlier, and worked in sales at a hardware store in town. He was a simple, hard-working, good-hearted man who attended the same church as me. Jack wasn't rich, far from it. He earned a modest salary, lived in a small house he was still paying for, and had 2 teenage daughters from his first marriage. But he was an honest man who treated the children well and respected me. We started meeting at church, then he began visiting me at home on Sundays. The children liked him from the beginning. He was affectionate, played with them, and never tried to impose himself as a father. He respected the fact that they already had a father, even if he was absent. In 1974, 9 years after my separation, Jack and I got married in a simple ceremony at the local church. I was 32 years old. He was 38. It wasn't a marriage of overwhelming love like the first had been, but it was a mature love, built on trust and mutual respect. We joined our families in a larger house that we rented together, 5 children in total, my 3 and his 2 daughters. It was a wonderful chaos, a large and united family. In 1976, our first daughter together, Rose, was born. 2 years later came Victor. Life didn't get easy overnight, but it got better. 2 salaries at home, even if modest, gave more security. We managed to buy our own house in 1980, a lot where we built a simple but comfortable 2-story home. My children grew up considering Jack as their real father. He raised them with affection, helped with their education, scolded them when necessary, celebrated their achievements. For them, Arthur was just a shadow from the past, someone they had known when they were very young. As for Arthur, the news that reached me through friends from the old town was not good at all. With each letter I received, his situation was worse. In 1971, my friend Zoe wrote telling me that he had definitively lost the store. He couldn't pay the back taxes, and the establishment was closed by the IRS. He was left without the last vestige of the prosperous life he had once had. He began living off odd jobs, loading trucks at the market, helping with moves, doing small repairs for anyone willing to pay. But the drinking problem only got worse. Many times he arrived drunk at work and ended up being fired. In 1975, 10 years after our separation, he went to live at the mercy of an elderly aunt, Mrs. Caroline. The poor old woman took pity on him and offered a corner in her backyard where he could sleep. In exchange, he helped with some household chores and took care of the yard. It was through this aunt that he got my address in Madison. In 1978, when I was pregnant with Victor, I received a letter from him. It was a pathetic letter, written with a trembling hand, full of grammar mistakes, asking for forgiveness and begging for a chance to meet his grandchildren. I showed the letter to Jack, who said the decision was mine. I talked with the children, who were already teenagers. Adam, at 18, said he had no interest in meeting his biological father. Claire, at 16, was even harsher. She said the only father she knew was Jack. Benjamin, who was 14, was curious. He asked if he could at least exchange some letters with Arthur. I allowed it, but made it clear that any contact would be under my supervision. The correspondence lasted about 6 months. Arthur sent letters full of promises of change, saying he was trying to stop drinking, that he had found a steady job at a mechanic's shop. But Benjamin soon lost interest. The letters were always the same: many apologies, many promises, no concrete action. In 1982, Aunt Caroline died, and Arthur was literally on the street. He began living under bridges, in parks, begging for food and alms. He became a homeless person, a street dweller that everyone in town knew as Drunk Arthur. Friends who still kept in touch with me said it was sad to see. Thin, dirty, talking to himself, completely given over to alcohol. Many times the police would pick him up and take him to spend the night at the station, more out of pity than because he had done anything wrong. In 1989, I received a letter from Zoe telling me that he had been admitted to the public hospital with liver problems. The doctors said it was advanced cirrhosis, the result of years of alcoholism. There was no fixing it. It was just a matter of time. I talked with my children about the possibility of visiting him in the hospital. Only Benjamin showed interest. Even so, when we arrived at the hospital and saw the state he was in, it was a shock. Arthur was unrecognizable, yellow from jaundice, extremely thin, with a swollen belly from ascites. He couldn't even get out of bed. When he saw me, he started crying and asking forgiveness for the mistakes he had made. Benjamin was shaken to see his biological father in that state. They talked for a few minutes, more out of politeness than true emotion. It was as if they were talking to a stranger. Arthur died 3 weeks later, in October 1989. He was only 52 years old, but looked much older. The funeral was sad, with only a few distant relatives, me, Benjamin, and some people from town who came more out of curiosity than grief. Looking at that coffin being lowered into the ground, I thought about how cruel life had been to him. But I also thought that he had made all the wrong choices possible. He chose to betray his family, chose the path of lies, chose to surrender to alcohol instead of fighting to rebuild his life. As for Marlene, the news that reached me was quite different. Through the gossip network that connected our old town to Cincinnati, I always knew how her life was going. She really had managed to completely reinvent herself. Married to businessman Bernard Hamilton, she became a respected lady in local society. They had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, all raised with good education and opportunities. Bernard never knew about her story with Arthur. To him, Marlene was a girl from a humble family who had come to the big city looking for a better life. She maintained this version of the story until the end of her life. She participated in church groups, organized charity bazaars, was known as a charitable woman dedicated to her family. Ironic, isn't it? The same woman who had destroyed a family became an example of family virtue. Bernard died in 1998 at 78 years old, leaving Marlene a widow and well off. She inherited the business, properties, a good amount in the bank. The children were already adults and well established in life. In 2008, when I was already 66 years old and retired, I learned that Marlene had had a stroke. She spent a few years debilitated, cared for by her children, until she died in 2010, at 73 years of age. Her funeral was a commotion in Cincinnati. Hundreds of people, flowers, emotional speeches about the wonderful woman she had been. Her children cried sincerely, without knowing that their mother had been the mistress who destroyed a family decades earlier. I have to admit I felt a twinge of bitterness when I learned this. She had managed a full life, respected, surrounded by family love. Meanwhile, Arthur died alone and despised, and I spent years struggling to rebuild my life. But I also thought that perhaps Marlene had learned something from that experience. Maybe she had really been a good wife to Bernard, a good mother to her children. Sometimes people change, mature, become better. As for me, I can say I had a good life after all that turbulence. Jack was a wonderful companion until he died in 2005, at 69 years old. Together we raised 7 children. We saw them all graduate, get married, give us grandchildren. My 3 children from my first marriage became good people. Adam became an accountant, got married, had 2 children. Claire became a teacher, also started a family. Benjamin pursued a military career, retired as a sergeant. All of them consider Jack as their real father. When they talk about Arthur, it's always as that man or Mom's first husband. They never created an emotional bond with him. Today, at 83 years old, I am a widow, but I have a large and united family. 15 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren, and more on the way. I live in a comfortable house that I managed to buy with my retirement, surrounded by people who love and respect me. When I look back, I don't regret anything I did. That revenge of 1965 saved my life and my children's lives. If I had forgiven Arthur, he probably would have continued to cheat on me, humiliate me, spend our money on other women. Life taught each of us the lesson we deserved. He paid dearly for his betrayal and cowardice. She got a second chance and knew how to take advantage of it. And I learned that a courageous woman is capable of rebuilding her life as many times as necessary. And that, my dears, is the whole truth about how a betrayal can change the destiny of several people forever. I hope you enjoyed this story that marked my life so deeply. If you did, don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already subscribed, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my stories. Tell me in the comments what you thought of this revenge. Do you think I went too far, or did Arthur deserve everything that happened to him? And have you ever been through a similar situation in life? Share your experiences with me. I love reading your comments. A big kiss to each one of you, and see you in the next story. Bye, my loves.